Hello, I'm, I'm known as Have a Vida Online, and today I'm making my first YouTube video. It's a guide to Blue Black Storm, at least my deck. Uh, I decided to make this guide because I've had some good results with the deck. I think it's pretty powerful, but sometimes when I play against Blue Black Storm opponents that are playing this deck, I can see some of their suboptimal plays and also talk through my deck choices because there's no stock deck. Like, I think the only cards that you see in every Storm deck, every Blue Black Storm deck, in the main deck, I think you're guaranteed to see like two of all four of those, two of Mind's Desire, four Phoenix Searches, four Familiars, four planning, like, planning. I'll talk about planning later, but not all Storm decks, and these cards. Like, these 26 I think are in every Storm deck, and the other are like kind of my own choices, though they didn't come from me. I looked at other deck lists to build this, but yeah. First, I'm going to talk about the mana base a bit, since I think it's pretty relevant. We've got we've got 16 blue sources, though only 8 of them tap for blue on turn 1. So not always will you be casting the Ponder on the first turn of the game, but I don't think it really matters that much. Like, playing a tap land on turn 1 is totally normal in this deck, and it's not a big issue. Like, you mostly need your mana from turn 2 onwards. Like, with a good, because early game, what you're trying to do with this deck is mostly cantripping to find the pieces you want, with planning, ponder, and then you can have some acceleration with familiar, etc. So you don't really need untapped blue on 1. There are 2 swamps only because swamp is very bad when you're comboing off, because when you're comboing off you need a lot of blue mana and you don't need a lot of black mana. You only need black mana to cast Familiar, Petition, and Tendrils, and Ritual, but Ritual itself makes black mana. And then there are very few duos that could come in untapped, because you're looking to and there are so low black sources, like 10 is a very low amount, because you're mostly not worrying about black mana until later in the game. The only early play you can make with black mana is playing a familiar on 2, which is not always what you want to do, and you also have a lot of cantrip to find black mana if you need to. So your blue spells find you black mana. And the 2 aqueducts are there because they they make they make it so your Phoenix Search becomes a ritual, like a pyretic ritual by itself, because you use 3 mana to untap 4 mana if you have like 3 lands and one of them is an aqueduct, and it also makes your turnabout more powerful. And oh yeah, and there's an added bonus from playing Aqueduct, because if you're on the draw and you play Aqueduct on turn 2, you discard to hand size, which is normally not what you really want to do, but in this deck, discarding to hand size is quite good, because like, you can discard an excess land to fill your cruise, or you can discard your, where is it? You can discard your Deep Analysis, which draws 2 for 4 and has flashback for 2 mana and paying 3 life. So I think discarding to hand size on turn 2 on the draw is quite good with Aqueduct. It also like gets you another land on your hand, which you can then ditch to Phoenix Search. Like, sometimes you're comboing off and you have a bunch of Frantics, but you don't have much card on your hand, and then the extra land you got from the Aqueducts will help you have the critical mass of cards you need to go off the turn. So, first, I think it's important to talk about the cantrips. You have like you have these cantrips: Ponder, Probe, and Planning. When should you cast them? Ponder, I think there's no scenario where you have open blue mana and you don't cast Ponder. You should cast Ponder at all times to look for what you need. And when do you shuffle? For example, uh, I have I have seen some hands which are like, let's say there's one ritual, there's like three random lands, a ponder, I have a turnabout, and I have like a frantic search. Frantic search is a card that makes it less punishing that you top one exact card that you need and two useless cards. So if you have Frantic Search in your hand, it's kind of okay to top a bad card if you're also topping a really good card you need to make your hand better. Because you have more looks with the Frantic Search. Though there's a case for saving the Frantic Search for mana. Now there's also the other cantrip this deck has is strategic planning. Why do I play strategic planning? There are two other choices for the same amount of mana that I could play. There's the Sornery card from Strixhaven, it's called Curate, which you look at the top two cards of your library, you put any number of them into your graveyard and the rest back on top of your library. So, what are the pros of Curate? Curate is a card that, say, you play it on turn 2 and there are two cards you need to top, or like one card you need to top, one you need to grave. It says exactly better when there's two cards that you need to top, because Curate looks at two cards and you choose one or two of them to put in your hands. And there's also Discovery Dispersal, I think is the name of the cards. Yeah, which you're not playing the second half of the card ever. Like when I tried this card and from thinking about Storm games, and I don't think you're ever casting Dispersal. But Discovery is pretty much the same as Curate, but the difference being you can play black or blue mana for it and it's sorcery speed. So those are two cards that are pretty similar to planning. The reason I do play planning though is that planning is not so good early in the game, but I mean sometimes it can be as good. But when you're comboing off, planning is much better because you look at three cards at once. So you're not like graveyards in two cards. One of them is average, one of them is bad, like a land when you already have a handful of lands. You're going to graveyard that if you're playing Discovery, but then you don't know what the other card is, the third card is. Like maybe the third card is worse than the average card. Say you have a Ponder on seconds from your library. Like the order of your library could be something like Islands, Ponder, Islands. If you play Discovery or Curate, you look at only Islands and Ponder, and then you think, wait, I don't want any of these. Ponders is just another cantrip. I want some action. And then you graveyard those two, and the top card of your library is a land, which you don't need when you're comboing off. But if you play planning while you're comboing off, you see this stack of three cards, and you graveyard the two islands and pick a ponder to your hands. That's the reason why I think strategic planning is better than Discover Dispersal or Curate. Then other deck choices like Pieces of the Puzzle. My first draft, I think I played for deep analysis, but it felt a bit awkward when against aggro decks you couldn't flash it back as much, and sometimes the card gets stuck in your hands, like you can't discard it and you just have a 4 mana draw 2, and it's pretty bad. Pieces of the puzzle, I think 2 of them are pretty good because although a bit expensive, it looks at a bunch of cards. It looks at 5 cards and chooses 2 instant or sorcery cards, which are mostly what you're looking for with the deck. The only cards you have that aren't instant or sorceries are these 5. So I like Pieces of the Puzzle a lot, and it also gets to 2 mana when discounted by Familiar, and etc. What else? I don't think there's much else to talk about on the deck. I mean, I like the 2 turnabouts because you can't play too many of them, but they're pretty much a ritual in this deck. Generally, when you cast Turnabout, you'll be paying 3 mana to generate 4 or 5 mana. So it's like an extra copy of Dark Ritual, or at the very least, it's mana neutral and helps storm counts. Then I play with 2 Dark Petitions. It's a Demonic Tutor that costs 5 mana and generates 3 black mana. You always have Spell Mastery in this deck. You never have less than 2 cards in your graveyard, but it's important that when you're delving with Treasure Cruise, you exile you exile lands, Familiar, and Primal Amulets. You don't exile your spells, since you need spells for Spell Mastery. And I play only 2 of those because they're a bit slow. Obviously, Demonic Tutor is very good in a Storm deck, but even when you already have some mana, this not only does it cost 5 mana to cast, but it also only generates black mana. So sometimes you'll be stranded for blue. Many times when I'm comboing off, I can't cast Dark Petition because let's say I have 6 mana. I can't tap 2 blue for I can't leave up only 1 blue for Dark Petition because this deck really needs double blue for turnabouts and for Mind's Desire. So, and also like when you're playing multiple spells a turn, generally the spells you're playing are blue, so it really taxes your blue mana more than just taxing your mana. But I really like this card. It can find you exactly the piece you need. It can find you a Treasure Cruise, a Tendrils, maybe sometimes Phoenix Search or Turnabouts, or I never found Primal Amulets actually. So it can find you mostly these cards, and also, especially post board, it can find repeal for you. Repeal is pretty important post board, and I'll get to that soon. And there's the other mode of Dark Petition, which you can play Dark Petition for Dark Ritual, which generates 1 mana. It nets 1 mana because it costs 5 to play Dark Petition. You get 3 black mana back. You play Dark Ritual. You get mana back, and then you're suddenly. Oh wait, is it mana neutral? No, I must be counting wrong. It costs 2. Yeah, it's actually mana neutral. Never mind whatever I said. Oh my god. I've been thinking about this wrong all the time. Oh, because like Dark Ritual costs 1 mana to cast, so if you're paying 2 mana for Dark Petition effectively, and then 1 mana for Dark Petition, you're generating 3 black mana. So it actually is mana neutral, but it's 2 storm counts. You can use Dark Petition for 2 storm counts. Then, well, the other interesting choice, I guess, Mind's Desire. I only played 2 of them. I think this kind is kinda slow. Most of the times when you're going off, you don't need Mind's Desire. I like to have some of them in my deck because in some spots they're good. Like when you have a hand full of rituals, you have Dark Ritual, Frantic Search, and Turnabout. Mind's Desire is good because you can you can play Mind's Desire with mana floating. That's very important because unless you're desiring for like 8 plus cards or even more, I think you really need mana open because there is a chance you don't hit any rituals and you won't be able to cast your storm cards. But Desire depends from game to game how much you cast it for. Sometimes you only need like 2 hits from Desire to get to the storm count you need. Or you need Desire to get some instants and sources to fill your treasure cruise. Anyways, and Repeal. Repeal is a card that I initially didn't play, but it's been impressing me a lot because in game 1 it can deal with annoying permanents. And by dealing with, I mean, it's not straight up a removal spell, but when you're playing Storm, you don't need removal spells. Because removal spells cost a card. Repeal doesn't cost a card, and it puts the permanent back into the opponent's hands. It's very important that it doesn't cost a card because Storm's a deck that really needs its card density. It can't play like 1-for-1 cards that deal with opponent's threats. The only one for the only cards I have in my whole deck that deal with 1-for-1 with opponent's threats are Duress and Snapback. Duress in the sideboard because Duress is a card you need in some level. I used to run 4, but I cut down to 3 exactly for the same reason. You can't have your deck full of air. So Duress is one of the 1-for-1 cards, but it's pretty good because like in him matchups, when your opponent plays him to Turak, and obviously other spells, you can board Duress in only for him to Turak, but the rest takes out the him and it's suddenly not exactly a 1-for-1 because the him would steal 2 cards off of your hands. And the snapback, I play this only for the reanimator matchup because the only card reanimator can have that beats you is Sire of Insanity. And this gives you interaction on the draw against a turn 1 reanimated I forgot the name of the card already. But it gives you turn 1 and turn 0 answer to that, and also gives you turn 1, turn 2, etc. answers to that. Since sometimes it's not enough time to play your Nihil spell bombs, they do it turn 1 on the play and you can't even deploy your graveyard hate before they do their combo. Now, since I'm already talking about this, I'll talk a little bit more about the sideboard. Wait just a second, I gotta load my music. So, there are 2 sweepers here. Why am I not running the same sweeper? I mostly, in most matchups, I don't actually board both of those. Even against creature matchups, I mostly only board one of them. For why is that? Because like I said before, you can't have your deck full of air. You need your deck full of cards that enable your combo turn. And these cards don't enable your combo turn. Even Yahini's expertise, which you cast and then it allows you to cast a spell with mana value 3 or less, you're still going down on mana when you cast this. And I don't like it. So, what's the difference between matchups I board in Tendrils and Yahini's expertise? I like Flame Tendrils against very aggressive decks, especially Mono Black aggro. It's very good versus Mono Black aggro because it exiles their creatures. It's also good against White Weenie tokens deck. And coming one turn before is really relevant when you're dealing with an aggressive deck. In Yahini's expertise, I board them in against some still aggressive but not as fast creature decks. And very rarely I will board both of these in, but they're mostly for different matchups. I don't like boarding both of them in. And even against some creature matchups, I don't board any of them in because I think it's more worth it to preserve the speed of your combo rather than disrupt what the opponent is doing. The Primal Amulets. This is a card I really like against the fair matchups that don't play counter spells. I always board them in versus fair matchups that don't play counter spells. Because you can either ritual it on turn 2, or you can just play it on turn 4 or something, or even when in the turn you're comboing off. And this card makes especially your Phoenix Searchers and your Turn-abouts nutty, because you can generate a huge amount of mana with Primal Amulets in play, and basically when you flip Primal Amulets you win the game. That's basically what it is. Reason I don't play more is because this card is kinda slow. Like, this deck plans on killing mostly on turn 4 or 5. Sometimes, very rarely, it can kill on turn 3, but most of the time it's killing on turn 5, sometimes on turn 4. And sometimes you can afford to like play this on turn 4 or turn 5 and wait and wait and wait. Sometimes you need to combo off on turn 5 and you can play this card before comboing off. So it's mostly a card for matchups where you can combo on turn 6 or later and it won't be a big problem. What else? There's Into the Royal. This card is here over repeal on the board, especially out of respect for artifact heavy matchups, artifact ramp matchups, like a post player can have Lodestone Golem and you don't always have the mana to repeal the Lodestone Golem. Although this deck can storm through a Lodestone Golem with the amount of mana it can generate. And also it's here for the 6 mana artifacts, which I can't remember the name, that makes spells cost more. So you need Into the Royal for those matchups. It's also playable versus decks that play Rule of Law or something like that, which you, if you're boarding, if you're having repeal still be in your main deck for Rule of Law, if that's the only reason you're playing repeal, you could as well play Into the Royal or play either of them. And it is mostly the case where against like white decks that have Rule of Law, if they're like a control deck, I still don't board Into the Royal. I like repeal because it's sometimes a bit more flexible, and the reason to board Into the Royal is also, for example, if they have Rule of Law and Test of Talents, so they Rule of Law and you can win the game, obviously with Rule of Law in play, but you can repeal the Rule of Law at the end of the opponent's turn to then combo off on your turn. But if the opponent plays Rule of Law and they also have a Test of Talents for your repeal, then you have Into the Royal in your deck, which has the same effect but with a different name, so you can still have outs. The Curious Homunculus, the deck started out with 3 or 4 of them, but I think they're really corner case scenario. I only keep them in because honestly you don't wanna board too much with Storm, and I don't think I can't think of a matchup where I want more sideboard cards. Maybe someday if Reanimator is really popular, I will cut one of the Homunculus for another Snapback. Oh, by the way, Snapback is also good against Infect. I forgot to say that. But Curious Homunculus is exactly good for matchups where the opponent doesn't have removal, they aren't keeping removal in for Nightscape Familiar, and they also aren't a fast deck, which is very rare. Like, I do board them in sometimes, but I don't even remember what decks I board them in against, because these kinds of decks are not what you commonly see, and so it's just there for those matchups. Sometimes In game 2, I'll see that my opponent, which is like a control player, will not have bordered in removal. They bordered out all the removal. Then I'll play them in game 3 because they're not only do they make your spells cheaper, but they're also threats. You technically can win with only one of them in play because of the prowess. You can reach 20 or something prowess with this deck. The Brain Freeze, I play only one of these, and it's only there for when the opponent has an effect like Armored Eagle or Lost Legacy. So against basically every black deck that isn't Reanimator, because I don't think Reanimator plays those kinds of cards, but against all other black decks, I'll board this in just for safety, because they could have Armored Eagle or Lost Legacy or whatever, and you can't just lose to one Armored Eagle or one Lost Legacy, taking away your Tendrils of Agony. Of course, sometimes they'll have two or more of these effects, and they'll miraculously get those two in their opening hands, and they'll Armored Eagle slash Lost Legacy for both Brain Freeze and Tendrils of Agony. But that's what it is. You can't there's not another Storm card that's you should board in for, you have to board in for that. So it's okay to lose to like Ritual Lost Legacy into Ritual Lost Legacy, which is actually something that happened to me once. And the last card is Hard Evidence. Hard Evidence is a card that boarding only for the aggro matchups, obviously, and the reason it's there is because it's a cantrip that blocks early. I said before that I don't like boarding in both of those in most matchups, but I will board 2 hard evidence against most aggro decks. I, against Infect, for example, against Infect I only board 1 hard evidence in because sometimes the hard evidence is useless, and like they have the 1/1 unblockable for 2, which I forgot the name, and the hard evidence isn't really blocking. And also the Infect matchup is sort of like a combo mirror where you have to be fast. So even though it's a cantrip, it's a bit of a slow cantrip. It takes 3 mana to cantrip, but it's really good, especially against mono black aggro decks. Against mono black aggro decks, this will blank the 1-drop forever while also drawing you a card. So that's the reason I have hard evidences in the board. Now, how does sideboarding look with this deck? It's really hard to sideboard with Storm, and I haven't yet mastered the art of sideboarding with this deck. I can't say I have the best sideboarding decisions, but generally, what do I do? Let's say I was playing against a control deck. What do I board in slash what do I board out against control deck? Against a control deck, what I generally want is 2 or 3 duresses, sometimes a Brain Freeze, and the Amulet. These are basically all the cards I want. I also depend, for example, if it's a White's control deck, I like keeping the Repeal, because they could have Rule of Law. If it's not against a white deck, I take out the Repeals most of the time. And I board out all of the familiars versus the control decks, because generally they do keep in the removal for the game 2 for your familiars. So I'm not a big fan of the familiar in those matchups. What are the cards? I also generally against a control deck, if I need to bring in the Brain Freeze, I will either not bring in a duress, because sometimes you really don't need to if they're not as disruptive to you. Basically, the reason duress is here is not to stop your opponent's plan, it's to stop them stopping your plan. So you're not boarding in duress because the opponent has a good non-creature card, non-creature, non-land card that that's solely for their game plan that it's annoying to you. No, you boarding duress only if they have something that specifically hurts your game plan. So sometimes you don't really need all three duresses, and if you do need all of those five, what I generally do is board out a Dark Petition, because especially against the blue control decks, like Dark Petition is really good, but if you pay 5 mana for a Dark Petition and they counter it, you're actually paying 5 mana for it. You're not paying 5 mana and getting 3 back. So these are generally the cards I board out against control. Obviously, if it's not a white control deck, you can just board out the repeals and the familiar, and you can either keep in one familiar or two familiars depending on how much you want to board, or you can even bring in like either Into the Royal or Spellbomb if they have some graveyard stuff, or a Curious Homunculus, which I don't actually like because you're already bringing out the familiars. But and the Curious Homunculus has, it only adds mana like the familiar if it survives a turn, if you untap with it, because it transforms at the beginning of your upkeep. But these are like the options you can bring in. against aggro decks, what's the plan? Generally against all aggro decks, I put one copy of both of these. I cut the Primal Amulets. I cut one Deep Analysis because it's not that easy to pay life against them. And what do I board in? I board in some amount of these cards. So what happens then? It means you can just either not board in a sweeper. Sometimes some aggro decks require you to bring in the rest, some black aggro decks require you to bring in Brain Freeze. Generally, you're boarding in one or two of those sweepers. Depending on the matchup, you're boarding the two hard evidence, sometimes one, and sometimes even none. Like I said, in fact, I board in just one hard evidence. If the hard evidence isn't blocking really well, it's not worth it to board in the hard evidence. But generally I board in two hard evidence, one of these two seepers, depending on what I want, and then depending on exactly the deck my opponent's playing, I could board in Brain Freeze, I could board in Duress, or if, for example, if they're white weenie and they generally don't have a lot of interaction, sometimes I even board in the Homunculus, because it can help you combo off faster, while also technically being a blocker. Combo mirrors. How do I board in combo mirrors? For combo mirrors, this is the only time I think it's worth it to disrupt your gameplay a bit. For example, a Storm Mirror. What do I do in a Storm Mirror? For Storm Mirrors, I do bring in the 3 duresses, and it's not for advancing my game plan, it's actually for slowing down their game plan, because they're a deck that's as fast as you. So for this reason, it's worth it to disrupt their game plan. And the duresses take out like most of the time when you're playing Storm, you have a hand that's you can have balanced hands, but when you have imbalanced hands, you have hands that are overloaded with cantrips or card draw, or you have hands that are overloaded with ritual. So if your opponent has a hand full of rituals and only one card draw spell, only one payoff, you can duress that, and suddenly their game plan is so much slower. So I do board in the 3 duresses. I board in one Spellbomb against Storm. It kind of depends, like if someone's playing the mirror, the 75 card mirror, I will only board in one Nihilus Spellbomb, because you don't want to overload with this effect, since for example against my deck, the Nihilus Spellbomb only hits the 2D penalties and it makes the treasure cruises slower. So it's not accomplishing that much. It is, however, a cantrip, a slow cantrip, that I think it's worth it to bring in. And what do I board out? Again, it's a combo mirror, it's a question of speed, so I do like to board out all these slow cards out, and I also board out the repeal. And since it's a storm mirror, a combo mirror, generally your opponent's not playing removal, I like to board in the Curious Homunculus, a single one of them, to accelerate your deck, like you play it on turn 2 or turn 3, you untap with it, and suddenly it's this huge attacker that they have to deal with because it's gonna hit them for a lot. So that's generally the cyber plan I have versus combo. I'm sure I haven't covered all of the matchups, but I've talked a good bit about sideboarding. I think you have a good idea of how to board in matchups you have. So now about the game plan. Uh, Wait a little bit. I gotta get some water. Okay, sorry for the wait. Now, talking about game plan, I think the best thing to do is look at some of my games. Um, let's look at my last game today, playing the finals of the tournament. This game was against a deck I never played before. I played against a Simic Snow deck, and I'll walk through my choices this game so that you have an idea of what to do. So, oh, sorry. Okay, it's paused. So looking at the opening hands, it's an unknown deck. I didn't know what deck my opponent was playing, but I chose to keep this hand because it has Aqueduct and a Ritual to accelerate. Sure, the other cards are pretty slow, like you have Petition and Cruise, and Probe, which you have no idea what will come for Probe, but since it has Aqueduct, which you I sort of count with in my opening hands, I count a hand with Aqueduct as a keep. Obviously, I can't play too many Aqueducts, otherwise I'll get lands with like 2 Aqueducts, which I can't keep despite being 2 land hands. But if a hand has a land and an Aqueduct, I think it's pretty much a snap keep unless the rest of your hand is absolutely awful. So I chose to keep this hand. My plan with this hand is to play lands on one, since I don't know the deck the opponent is playing. Before they play the islands, which sorta indicates to me they're not a fast deck, I could have considered paying 1 mana for Pope. That was a consideration, like turn 1 play tap lands, turn 2 probe and play Aqueduct. But since my opponent play islands, I think I can save my probe. At least on the first 2 turns. So the opponent plays island and plays astrolabe. Pretty much, oh wait, it's hard to do this. Pretty much before the after seeing island astrolabe, I thought they're a control deck, they're a slow deck. So I thought I can wait with my pro, and I do the planning, and then I played green and discard which indicates they're a snow deck, which I never played before. I had no idea what a snow deck did in this format, so I got a bit worried, but I did know that this deck was at least not a very aggro deck. So turn goes on, it's my turn, untap, I draw an island. So I probe them because I have no idea what they're playing, if I should play around counter spells, or if they're only a deck with their own game plan. I probe them, I realize they're not a counter spell deck, play my aqueducts. So far not really many decisions. Discard a Sunken Hollow because the island will come in untapped and then the catacomb will come in untapped, but the Sunken Hollow won't. Then they play another one of these, try one. and this is my turn. So I draw the ponder. There's an interesting decision here which I could either planning first or ponder first. In the actual game I spent a little bit of time thinking about this. But I chose to ponder first since I need, in this hand, I need exactly some speed for this hand to work. Because I've got card draw, and the Dark Petition. So I have 3 slow cards and 2 fast cards. But you can't, generally you don't want to probe before turn 4 with an aqueduct in play, or like you have a familiar out, so probe is not a very fast ritual. So I wanted some acceleration. I look at this top 3 and I honestly don't want any of these cards. Like, I already have 2 other lands and the repeal is not gonna slow them down enough that it's worth it for me to keep. So, oh sorry, I thought I was playing the game. So I do put them back in any order, shuffle my library, and I draw a turnabout. What could have been the case? I could have found exactly 1 card that's fast and I don't want any of the other 3. So I thought it was worth it to play the ponder first and the planning second. Now, I do a turnabout, which means like on turn 4 I will have a lot of mana. So I play the planning, I look at these 3 cards, and which are a land, a pieces of the puzzle, and a dark ritual. I basically instantly take the dark ritual since I think that's exactly what my hand needs to work. I don't need pieces of the puzzle, which would take me 1 whole turn to find some cards I need. From here, they're still not doing much, so I don't feel very pressured. I don't feel like I need to win this turn, and because of that, I choose to develop the amulet, since this won't become a creature until at least not their next turn, but after the next turn. So I'm not facing any threat of dying next turn. So I chose to go with the amulet, since I know if I play amulet, I'll be able to combo off next turn, regardless of whatever they put on the board. Even though I could technically wait 2 turns to combo off, which I don't quite remember if I do or don't this game, but I think I go off next turn. So they play the bear, they're soon gonna flip this. Oh, they're actually threatening to flip this next turn. So I actually have a decision when I started this turn. I could technically wait for 1 more turn, because they're only presenting 10 damage on board. Or realistically, they're presenting something with this land, they represent 12, and they could play like 2 or 3 more snow permanents. So they're actually representing maybe 15 damage. And what's the problem of taking 15 damage? You have some cards that cost life in this deck. So if I do take 15 damage, it will make comboing off on my next turn a bit slower, since I won't be able to pay for all my probes with my life points. And I started turn off by playing Dark Ritual so I could play Familiar. Why is that? Like I said before, you're kinda choked on blue mana in this deck. So you wanna spend your black mana to play your black spells. You generally want to just keep your blue mana floating as much as you can. And this turn is pretty much easily a win from here. You play the Familiar, you play the Ritual, you already have 2 charge counters on the amulets. After that you can play the Cruise, get 3 charge counters on the amulets, and then you decide to go from there. With amulets flipped, the turnabout generates almost infinite mana because you can copy it, untap your lands twice. The Frantic Search also generates a billion mana because you can untap your 3 lands twice. So it's a kind of an easy win from here, I think. I don't think there's any difficult lines I go through. I start with Cruise. At first I was exiling random cards, but since I had 2 lands in my graveyard, I did exile the 2 lands so I can keep a petition. Then I probe, flip the amulets, And from here it's easy. Like you cast double frantic, turnabouts, and then Mind's Desire. And Mind's Desire is gonna be for like 10, it's almost impossible to hit. I don't I even forgot to tap lands before playing the Frantic Search because of how easy this turn was. I was kinda not that focused on this turn. I made some not the optimal. I didn't play my cards in the optimal order because I already knew I had a little with the tenders. So I win this game, and I will go to the next game. So this is game 2. I'm on the draw against a deck that's not really fast, but it does threaten like turn 4, turn 5 kills. So I can't dawdle around too much. I see this hand which has double aqueduct. What are my thought process when keeping this hand? I think this hand is worth keeping because I don't think the opponent's deck has a way to kill the familiar. They're a blue-green deck. I highly doubt they're playing removal spells. Maybe they're playing Blizzard Brawl, I think is the name. But I'm not that scared of removal spells from their deck. And I can play Island turn 1 into Ponder, and then Aqueduct, bring back my island, discard the island to hand size. Or discard the Aqueduct to hand size. Whatever ends up being the optimal play from a few turns from now. So first turn, obviously play Island, play Ponder. I look at this stack which has turnabouts, strategic planning, and I can't quite remember what the last card was. I do not shuffle. Oh yeah, the last card was a land. I remember when I played this game. It was planning, turnabouts, and lands. I put them in this order because I do think planning is good to scope my hands, and then turnabout's another way for me to win fast. With these hands, I'm thinking I can win on turn 4 if my familiar survives, or turn 5, maybe even 4 if it doesn't survive. Oh, actually, I do play familiar on my turn 4, so never mind. I plan on winning in the same turn I play familiar. So here he is, they attack me for a little bit. I play the aqueduct, not much to do. Discard my island to hand size. Then it starts being threatening. They play this huge bear, which is threatening most likely to turn clock me. So I realize I have to win on turn 4, and I cast the familiar and the planning, thinking I have to win on turn 4. So I see planning, familiar, and frantic. I decide to take the frantic because I don't think the second familiar is as needed as the first one. I like the frantic because not only does it help me get more mana, but it also lets me look at a bunch of cards. And this turn, the bear goes really big. I think they play like 1 or 2 marginal permanents, and basically they're 2-turn clocking me. Unless I chump with the familiar, which I don't really want to do. It's this pause? Or do they just take a while? I'm not sure what's going on. Okay, so Modo kinda bugged out, so I'm going to restart this. And see if I can get the game from the spot that I was. Meanwhile, I'll drink some water. So we're almost to the point where the game was before. Hopefully Modo doesn't crash again. Guess this. Yeah, finally didn't crash. I think it becomes an 8 or a 9 power bear. Oh my god, did it crash again? Oh, sorry. I won't be able to show the rest of the game because Modo doesn't want me to show you. But what happens is I play the islands in my next turn. I play frantic and frantic and frantic. I discard a deep analysis, I think, and I believe I get Mind's Desire to finish my hand out. And what happens is I think I get a Dark Ritual too. So what this becomes is I think it becomes. Oh, I'm sorry. I will pitch this to the friend. So I think what the hand becomes is some lands, which I'm not sure if it's this one or another one. Some lands, dark ritual. The discarded card draws me to two cards. I have dark ritual, desire, and lands. This is my hands for the turn I'm comboing off. Obviously I'm drawing and discarding a lot of cards with the 3 frantics I cast, but ultimately this is all my hand is: lands, ritual, and my desire. After all the filtering I go through. And so I will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 storm counts. 5, 6 storm counts because I cast a spell from my graveyard. I'll have 6 storm counts. I will have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I think I'll have 12 mana. Something like 3 or 4 of it being black mana. No, I can actually filter most of my black mana into blue. I think I'll have 12 mana next turn. I cast Desire. I go for this line because drawing having 6 cards to play off of Desire is basically enough for me to win from the spots. I draw some card draw or whatever, or some card selection, and I can fight my combo with a Desire for 6, I think. A Desire for 6 and 6 mana floating. 6 mana floating after a Desire is a lot of mana. And this is basically what the 2 games from the final were. And I think from watching these 2 games with commentary and from listening to me talk about the deck, it will give you somewhat of a better understanding of how to play the blue-black storm deck if you like to play this deck. I personally, I never stormed before. I had like 1 match of Vintage Cube where I storms, but I'm a very new player. I started playing last year with Arena and I didn't have experience with Storm. So when I got into Penny Dreadful, I pretty much copied, I think, J underline Mecha's list with some changes of cards I didn't like and etc. But basically I copied his list, kept improving it, and I really like the deck from playing it a little bit. And it's been my best performing deck both in tournaments and in leagues. I guess in leagues the other deck I do perform well a lot with is with Burn, and although Burn is a very difficult deck, this is not the video for me to talk about Burn. Thank you for watching, I hope you like this video, and sometimes I stream on Twitch. I stream Penny Dreadful tournaments. I will probably sometime end up streaming like Vintage Cube or Arena. I'm not a big fan of Standard or Historic right now, but a few months ago I was a big fan of Historic and I was streaming Historic. So I also do draft sometimes, but that's it for the video. Goodbye.